Our story begins with a young man who practices his fireball spells millions of times a day, yet he still can't even light a mosquito coil. Even the household mosquitoes seem to mock him, treating him like nothing more than a damp, harmless chicken. His classmates also call him the weakest mage in history, but what they don't know is that he has suddenly awakened an SSG talent, the Divine Thorn. Now, he can obtain a proficiency point every single second. While others struggle to earn a handful of points per dungeon, he receives one for free every second of the day. It has reached the point where any basic skill can be transformed into a cataclysmic forbidden spell in his hands. We return to the beginning, during the awakening ceremony. The school beauty, Janja, who always stood tall before him, awakened a rare profession as a mentalist master, gaining the high-level skill of thought manipulation. Meanwhile, he awakened nothing but the most ordinary profession, a simple mage, obtaining the basic skill of fireball. Just as everyone was making fun of him, another voice echoed in his mind, offering its congratulations. Had he truly awakened the power of time? Had he really awakened time itself? Had he actually awakened the power of time? With this newfound talent, a wild idea began to take root in his mind. First, he would improve his basic fireball until it became a forbidden spell. He had to hurry, because in 1 month, Daisha would organize the annual national exam for professionals. During the following 7 days, he stayed inside his house and went nowhere at all. He sat there, staring at his balance of over 600,000 proficiency points. He couldn't help but take a deep breath before opening his fireball skill panel and frantically adding points. On his panel, the humble fireball skill began to glow with the constant glory of each new upgrade. He had already spent 100,000 proficiency points to improve, which is quite a staggering amount. He wondered if he had unlocked a new draw, perhaps something like the Fireball Artisans. The original fireball, which was once utterly banal, had now reached level 7. Instantly, a wave of scorching heat surged through his entire body. Afterward, he checked the next level's draw, the 8th level incarnation of the Fire Spirit. The proficiency points required for that specific upgrade were a massive 500,000. He was genuinely surprised by the cost of these high-level improvements. The numbers were practically astronomical, so he paused for a moment to look at his other 2 skills. Mana Economy and Rapid Incantation could each reduce his mana consumption and casting time by 10%. We see that he had just acquired a 7th order spell. The incantation of the Celestial Dragon actually takes 20 seconds to cast, with a 2-hour cooldown. Furthermore, each cast requires 30,000 mana, while his current limit is a mere 100 points. To be honest, he couldn't even use his own high-level skills yet. He switched his focus to the Mana Economy skill and began adding points as frantically as before. The ding-ding-ding sound echoed without stopping as he consumed another 100,000 proficiency points. He soon acquired a new passive skill called Mana Tempest, which affected every spell he cast. The first effect reduced consumption by 70%, while the second boosted his maximum mana from all sources. His power increased significantly this time, restoring 7% of his maximum mana every single second. And finally, every 8 hours, he gained the chance to cast any spell below the 9th order for free. He continued by focusing on the final passive skill, Rapid Incantation, consuming another 100,000 proficiency points. And here we see him acquiring a new passive skill, all thanks to the power of Eternal Divinity. The first effect manifested immediately. He had truly acquired a brand new passive ability through the grace of Eternal Divinity. Then came the second effect, followed quickly by the 3rd and 4th effects. Then the 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, and 10th effects all triggered in rapid succession. The 11th and 12th effects soon followed suit, followed by the 13th and the 13th once more. Then the 15th, 14th, 16th, and even the 24th effect appeared. Finally, the 25th, 26th, 34th, and 33rd effects were revealed, one after another. The power continued to surge, repeating its growth again and again. He felt grateful. Although blowing up monsters can be quite a frustrating business, he appreciated the kindness of these 2 people. As he continued to push deeper into the woods, the forest monsters began to grow more and more dense. Suddenly, 8 giant pythons descended from the shadows of the canopy above. Fireballs erupted. In an instant, a dozen terrifying spheres of flame, the size of boulders, bombarded the giant pythons. The fire elements in this world required nothing more than a single thought from him to instantly dismantle his foes. Even these high-level monsters stood no chance. Suddenly, 2 grizzlies emerged from hiding and rushed forward with a roar. But a moment later, they were both pierced through by his fire spears, launched with instantaneous precision. Congratulations are in order, as he reaches level 2 and obtains 10 free attribute points. Immediately afterward, we see a brilliant white light emanating from his body. Having reached a higher level, he adds all 10 free attribute points to his mental attribute. As a result, his maximum mana value has increased once again by 700 points. He is content just looking at himself. With only 20 health points, he doesn't feel truly safe yet, but he already has a solution for this situation. With his incantation, a giant hexagonal magic circle suddenly appears on the ground, followed by a creature standing 5 or 6 meters tall. It is a level 6 fire-type summoning spell, the Molten Flame Demon. The effect of the spell draws directly from the surrounding area of fire elements. His goal is to summon a molten flame demon general, though at the moment of summoning, his mana consumption is quite excessive. But when he sees the attributes and skills of the molten flame demon, he decides it was all well worth the effort. The molten flame demon possesses no less than 500,000 health points. It represents a staggering power gap compared to the rest of the monsters in the Screaming Woods. Now he feels completely emboldened. And with a 7% mana recovery per second, his mana, which had just hit rock bottom, is rapidly replenished. He begins to chant once more, summoning a second molten flame demon, and then a third. However, summoning 3 demons is currently his absolute limit. He reflects for a moment and orders 2 of the demons to patrol and kill every monster they find in the woods. As for the remaining molten flame demon, he keeps it by his side to act as a personal bodyguard. He continues deeper into the forest, accompanied by his final molten flame demon. Along the way, he constantly receives notifications of the experience he is gaining. He had only taken a few steps when, once again, we see a brilliant white light emanating from his body. Congratulations are in order yet again, as he reaches level 3 and obtains another 10 free attribute points. Suddenly, 5 or 6 more white lights flash around him in rapid succession. He has already reached level 7, gaining even more attribute points to strengthen himself. To be honest, even he is stunned to have shot up to level 7 in just a matter of seconds. He wonders what those 2 flame demons are doing to generate such a massive and relentless wave of experience. While he stands there in surprise, we see that Xiaojian has also reached level 7. It turns out she has also been busy gaining levels within the depths of the Screaming Woods. At that very moment, she had already managed to reach level 6 on her own. This was all thanks to her mastery as a spiritual power practitioner and her lethal efficiency. Her rate of growth was impressive, higher, in fact, than that of her own parents. But even with her talent, she couldn't quite match the sheer destructive force of the molten flame demons. Moving through the woods, Xiaojian uses her psychic powers to subdue a gray forest cat before delivering a final, decisive blow. After exerting so much effort, however, her mana reserves were left completely depleted. She takes a moment to rest and drinks a magic potion to slowly restore her mana levels. During this brief pause, the face of the boy who had overshadowed her for 3 years drifts into her mind. She wonders what he could be doing now, and if he has truly allowed himself to be defeated so easily. As she lost herself in thought, a strange and sudden change began to take hold of the forest. Immense, thunderous noises began to echo through the trees without a moment's pause. The very earth seemed to tremble in fear, causing Xiaojian to snap her eyes open in alarm. What was once a simple training ground for Xiaojian has suddenly seen a massive horde of beasts emerge. What could these monsters possibly be so afraid of? Why did they look so utterly defeated? As the wave of beasts scrambled past, Xiaojian made a startling discovery. Following close behind was a terrifying monster, 5 or 6 meters tall, its body encased in molten metal. In that instant, Xiaojian's survival instincts took over completely. Fortunately, she was able to use her telekinesis to propel herself away at high speed. At that very moment, across the entire Screaming Woods, a zone-wide alert began to blare, as the city's catastrophe center detected 2 massive waves of beast activity. A terrifying monster of unknown level and power had been spotted. It appeared right behind the beast wave, and a warning was issued to everyone currently inside the Screaming Woods. All professionals near the forest were ordered to evacuate immediately. The alert had reached level 2, a dire warning for all those involved. As the order to evacuate was given, Xiaojian's expression shifted to one of pure dread. A level 2 alert was something she had only ever read about in her textbooks. It meant that a terrible monster catastrophe was about to strike the entire city. Meanwhile, at the junction of Qingfeng Beach and the Screaming Woods, vast armies of professionals were already standing by on high alert. The plan was simple. Once the displaced monsters fled the forest, the army would launch a coordinated attack. But just as they finished dispatching a few stray monsters, a truly terrible scene unfolded before them. 2 flame demons charged out of the forest, and seeing their kin slaughtered, they let out a deafening, bone-chilling roar. The flame demons, who hadn't planned on attacking the humans, suddenly smiled as their giant hands flared and their tears seemed to burn with rage. They launched themselves with terrifying speed against the immense number of professional monster hunters standing in their way. At that moment, a large, unassuming man in the squad stepped forward, and a brilliant specter of sacred white light appeared on his finger. Immediately after, a golden loop manifested, shielding the professionals standing in the very front row. Waves of intense heat lashed against the golden barrier, and the terrible temperature threatened to shatter the loop in an instant. Wang Dai, the large man, quickly reinforced the defense by adding another layer of sacred light. With that, he managed to barely save the lives of his fellow professionals, which was no small feat, to be honest. As they wondered how they could possibly kill such a terrible monster, an extremely ancient voice suddenly echoed through the air. Falling from the sky, the voice commanded everyone to help, but warned that no one should actively attack a monster within the beast tide. They were told not to engage the two flame demons, but rather to let them freely cull the stampeding monsters, an order that left everyone listening in shock. We see the crowd frozen in disbelief, realizing this voice belonged to the strongest person in Zhang City, the president of the Professional Alliance. It was the fourth-rank Grandmaster, Zhang Xian. Everyone obeyed immediately, following exactly what the old man commanded. Old Zhang continued to issue orders to his subordinates within the alliance to maintain the perimeter. Incredibly, the two monsters didn't fly into a blind rage, but instead began harvesting the lives of the other monsters in a methodical manner. After barely 10 minutes, thousands of monsters had been slain, and the two flame demons returned to the Screaming Woods with an air of satisfaction. As the exceptionally terrible crisis lifted, the professionals sat down with a collective sigh of relief while Zhang Xian descended from the sky on a Pegasus. He watched the two demons depart, his eyes filled with envy and admiration, leaving the others to wonder if he knew what they actually were. He explained that they were all mistaken. These two flame demons weren't wild monsters at all, but the summons of a great archmage. Wang De and Wei Xing were utterly stunned by this revelation, and who could blame them, really? Wang De asked with a trembling voice if the president realized what this meant for the balance of power in Jiangxing's territory. A great level 6 archmage has arrived among us. Decades ago, he had been deeply interested in studies regarding the ancient pantheons. His own tutor, as it turns out, had been a powerful level 6 archmage as well. It was during that time that he witnessed his professor summon a creature known as a Balrog. It is a skill that every mage dreams of mastering throughout their entire life. Sadly, he felt he would likely never have that chance. A look of misfortune crossed Zhang Xian's face as he made a secret vow. Later on, he knew he had to find a way to locate this mysterious and powerful figure. He told himself that being guided by such a master would be the greatest possible honor. But just as the group prepared to leave, a terrifying fluctuation of magical power surged from the depths of the shore and beyond. Zhang Xian sensed a fire elemental aura even more staggering than that of the lava Balrog. Everyone looked up in shock, wondering if that massive silhouette in the sky could actually be a dragon. At that moment, an astonishing giant dragon, hundreds of meters tall, appeared in the heavens, radiating an aura of pure power. The giant dragon was composed entirely of the purest fire element, carrying an immense and sacred presence. Zhang Xian felt a sudden, overwhelming roar echo within his very spirit. This was what made the dragon so imposing. Suddenly, everything else felt empty as a level 7 entity manifested on the shore. This was no longer the work of a great archmage, but that of a level 7 saint of law. For a long moment, the entire crowd was gripped by a sense of absolute panic. They began to evacuate to stay on guard. Meanwhile, we learned that an hour earlier, our protagonist had reached the center of the shore. But he had accidentally entered the territory of the shore tigers and was surrounded by hundreds of the robust beasts. Suddenly, an incredibly startling noise erupted from within the depths of the grotto. A moment later, a king tiger emerged, its body shimmering with a light that leaned toward a deep emerald hue. Yes, there it was, a king tiger with its massive frame glowing with that same emerald radiance. As it stepped out of the grotto, our protagonist's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. It seemed he had finally found the most powerful monster in the entire forest and beyond. This was definitely a boss. With a deafening roar, the king tiger lunged forward and swung its heavy paw. In an instant, more than a dozen razor-sharp wind blades struck him at an incredible speed. The lava tiger shield protecting his body dropped by more than 1,000 points in a single heartbeat. A faint smile played on his lips. He had finally found an opponent with a bit of actual strength. He decided then to head toward the shore, intending to use this encounter to test his new spells. With the chance to use a free daily spell and an instant high-level cast, this was, quite frankly, the perfect target. But before he could even launch his attack, 5 or 6 beams of white light suddenly enveloped his body. Congratulations were in order, as he had just jumped 5 levels consecutively, reaching level 12. Along with that surge of power, he gained 50 free attribute points to distribute as he pleased. The king tiger watched from a short distance, frozen in utter disbelief at what was happening to this human. It couldn't comprehend how his power level could possibly skyrocket so suddenly. Our protagonist simply extended a finger, pointing it directly toward the bewildered king tiger. An instant later, the fire elements between heaven and earth turned violently volatile. The entire pack of tigers began to panic, sensing the overwhelming aura of an imminent disaster. Several of the adult tigers didn't wait around. They immediately turned and began to flee on all fours. They were fighting with every ounce of their strength just to escape from that place alive. But the end awaiting them is nothing but despair, as the 7th Order Heavenly Flower Dragon's breath covers a massive area and, being instantaneous, bypasses any long incantation time. Consequently, the speed of this attack is far beyond anything anyone could have imagined. High in the sky, the elemental dragon faithfully raises its head to prepare for the strike. In the very next instant, the roar of a massive zone of burning dragon fire echoes through the forest. And just like that, everything within its reach vanishes instantly, reduced to nothing but scorched remains. Half a minute later, we see the silhouette of the flower dragon slowly fade away at the edge of the horizon. The entire pack of tigers that had surrounded him just moments ago has already been transformed into drifting ash. The king tiger itself was gone, leaving behind only a few pieces of equipment and a white skill book. Our protagonist picked up the 2 pieces of equipment and took a quick look at his spoils. He discovered they were merely low-level items, but he knew the true value lay within that skill book. It was an immediate-level skill book, containing a technique that even the king tiger could learn. His eyes lit up with interest, and without wasting a second, he used the skill book directly. Congratulations were once again in order, as he successfully acquired a brand new ability. This skill allows him to summon the essence of the king tiger to strike down enemies from a distance. To be honest, this particular skill serves as the very foundation for all wind-type kingly abilities. The only real difference between this king tiger strike and a standard fireball is that the tiger strike is invisible. Furthermore, its flight speed is incredibly fast, making it a difficult target to track, relatively speaking, of course. The damage from the king tiger strike represents only about half of what a fireball would deal. Still, considering the 7th order heavenly flower dragon can cause such widespread destruction, one has to wonder, just how staggering would the damage be from a 9th order forbidden spell? There was no point dwelling on it, as he felt himself overflowing with a new sense of energy. And almost without realizing it, we see that his level has already reached level 30. At level 30, one can head to the Jiangxing Career Transition Center to receive the 2nd job advancement quest. This is essential, as it's impossible to keep leveling up without completing the task to unlock that 2nd transition. Consequently, he no longer had any interest in lingering around this area. Just as he was about to leave, a faint green light in the distance caught his attention and drew him in. He raised his hand, and the fire demon that had been sent back to the elemental plane appeared once more. With a simple gesture, the fire demon marched obediently toward the spot where that green light had been flickering. Soon after, he discovered the source was actually the grotto where the king tiger had emerged earlier. He ventured deep inside and finally laid eyes on the source of that mysterious green glow. It was an ancient green crystal embedded firmly within the 4 walls of the grotto. These crystals, as it turns out, contain an extremely pure form of wind elemental force. He was delighted. To be honest, he hadn't expected anything more than that skill book. It was a pleasant surprise, and he imagined these could fetch quite a high price on the market. With the help of his Balrog, he began to extract the green crystals from the earth. The massive block of crystals was eventually pried from the rock and safely tucked away in his personal inventory. After that, he made his escape, leaving the area behind in the blink of an eye. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself back in the Jiangxing teleportation hall. Once home, he opened his status panel and saw he had gained an extra 40 to 50,000 skill points. It then occurred to him that he had acquired a brand new wind-type skill earlier that day. He realized that if he was patient enough to wait just one more day, he could potentially raise it to rank 7. The following day, we see him heading to the market to sell the green ore from the mine for 120,000. It was a worthy sum, and more than enough to finally put his debts to rest. Having surpassed 100,000 for the first time, his SSS-rank talent, Divine Thorn, unlocked a brand new feature. A new feature was exactly what he needed, so he quickly reached for his pocket. He hurried to open his talent interface to see what this new functionality was all about. The system informed him that he could now spend currency to purchase a very specific advantage. It was a 24-hour AFK proficiency point reward, which is quite convenient, to say the least. Of course, after each purchase, the amount of currency required for the next one would increase. The current price for a single purchase was set at 10,000 gold pieces. He was stunned. It was essentially a shortcut that felt almost like cheating. He could now spend his money directly to buy proficiency points whenever he wished. Without a moment's hesitation, he planned to spend every last coin he had on this. He opened the talent interface once more and chose to buy the reward immediately. To his absolute delight, he received the 24-hour AFK reward for his Divine Thorn talent. A total of 86,400 proficiency points were added to his total in an instant. At that exact moment, the phone in his bag began to vibrate. A notification appeared, confirming that 10,000 gold pieces had been deducted from his card. He didn't stop there, clicking the button again and again, lost in the excitement of the moment. He only stopped when the system finally displayed a message for insufficient funds. He checked his history and saw that the final purchase had cost him over 40,000 gold pieces. He certainly felt a sharp pang of regret. It seemed his old habits had returned with a vengeance. Just like that, the familiar life of being penniless had returned to haunt him once again. He quickly opened his personal panel, and fortunately, the proficiency point balance offered him some much-needed comfort. His current assignable proficiency points were quite impressive to look at. He had 425,821 points, but raising the Dragon Lizard Celestial Eye from rank 7 to 8 required 500,000. Since that was clearly insufficient for now, he turned his attention to learning the wind-type skill, Wind Soul. Accompanied by a constant stream of system notifications, the points began to flow into the skill. In an instant, his wind-type mastery jumped directly to rank 7. What surprised him even more, however, were the two new skills he unlocked at rank 5 and 6. The rank 5 skill, Rapid Wind Wing, allowed him to shroud his entire body in the power of the wind elements. It was a powerful ability, ensuring he could break through any illusion or true image. It consumed 500 mana per second and required a casting time of 1.5 seconds. With a 5-minute cooldown, the wind elements would manifest as a pair of literal wings. These wings allowed him to gain the incredible ability of high-speed flight. At the same time, the swirling currents surrounding him would block 3 incoming ranged attacks. He wondered if it was truly just a flight skill, as he had always dreamed of soaring through the sky. Then he considered the other secondary effect associated with this particular skill. The ability to block ranged attacks felt strangely familiar to him, to say the least. He couldn't help but compare it to Yasuo's Wind Wall, before turning his gaze to the 6th level skill. The Wind Wing skill seemed to have the distinct flair of a Mirage-style fighter. We see the Wind Wing effect in action, that sudden, violent dash in a single direction. It allowed him to perform an incredibly fast sprint attack against his foes. When he reviewed this particular skill, he couldn't help but feel it was absolutely cool and seductive. But a skill like this raised a question. Why would it appear in a mage's skill set? He was a mage. After all, was he really expected to use a melee weapon to make use of it? To be fair, a staff is technically considered a melee weapon if you swing it hard enough. But if you were forced to attack wildly with a wooden baton, things would get complicated. The enemy would likely strike back 100 times. It was a very strange situation indeed. Moving on, he headed to the building's exchange to trade in the black corn equipment he'd gathered. After selling off more than a dozen pieces of that black corn gear, he found an additional 20,000 yuan sitting comfortably in his account. Now, we watch as he begins to browse through the available options on the screen. He was preparing to select a general skill book to further his progress. A basic identification book caught his eye, priced at exactly 18,992 yuan. Upon closer inspection, he noticed there weren't many other general skill books available. Even a common identification book usually costs somewhere around 20,000 yuan. It was undeniably expensive, but such is the price for a book that reveals the unknown. At the very least, it would prevent him from overlooking a hidden treasure by mistake. And besides, he still had an astronomical amount of proficiency points to spend. He realized he could fulfill the requirements, skip the beginner stages, and move immediately to the highest level. With a general skill book in hand, he crossed his fingers and purchased that worthy basic identification book. And just like that, the learning process for the basic identification book was a complete success. We see that he has officially acquired the brand new skill of identification. Naturally, he didn't spend much time overthinking what to do next. He immediately spent a staggering 100 billion proficiency points. In return, he received a notification that was truly unprecedented. Congratulations, he was the first person on the entire white planet to upgrade the art of identification to the peak level. As a result, he obtained a unique reward that had been waiting for a very long time. He was delighted. He hadn't expected such a rewarding turn of events. But he understood the logic quickly. No one else had ever chosen to max out the art of identification before. To be honest, it simply wasn't profitable, and no one was willing to waste precious proficiency points on it. Most players would focus on professional combat skills rather than a utility like identification. Realizing this, he connected to the system, opened his skill bar, and activated the full-time eye. The skill triggers whenever he fixes his gaze on a target for more than 3 seconds. It allows him to ignore level differences and bypass all concealment or hiding effects the target might have. Essentially, he can now obtain every single piece of information regarding that specific target. Furthermore, if the target is a raw material or a piece of equipment that hasn't been identified yet, he has a 10% chance of actually improving the quality of that item during the process. He was a bit shocked, as the sheer power of this skill had far exceeded his wildest imagination. He decided to test his new power by concentrating his attention on a professional passing by behind him. 3 seconds later, every bit of information, status, and even the person's limits were completely exposed before his eyes. Trying to calm his excitement, he turned around to finally accept the second-level class transfer mission. As he entered the building, a young woman stepped forward and greeted him with a calm smile. She politely asked if she could help the professional with anything today. He wasted no time and stated that he wanted to accept the second-level class transfer mission. The young woman continued to smile brightly at him as she listened to his request. She then asked him to present his official professional identification card to proceed. He felt a bit awkward, realizing he had changed classes but hadn't yet taken the official professional exam. He asked if his student ID would suffice, which left the young woman looking rather surprised. She asked if he truly meant he was a new professional who had only just changed classes a week ago. He simply nodded, and we see the young woman becoming even more astonished by the situation. To be honest, she had never seen anyone reach the requirements for a second-level transfer in just 1 week. Despite her shock, she efficiently finished the formalities and processed his request. After that, she led him to one of the specialized rooms within the transfer center. Upon entering the room, he saw a white zero essence stone floating silently in the air. The moment he touched the essence stone, he received a notification from the system. He was quite impressed, wondering if the difficulty level was always going to be like this. A level 60 challenge? That level was actually lower than the fused demon flame he had summoned himself. Even if it was a boss, a celestial dragon lizard should be able to kill it quite easily, shouldn't it? We discover that the requirements for this mission are so flexible they even allow for a 3-person team. It's almost too indulgent, isn't it? To be honest, the sheer ease of it all was enough to make him weep. After successfully finishing the mission, he finally stepped out of the class transfer center. Without wasting a single moment, he headed straight toward the teleportation hall. The magic circles began to glow with a brilliant light, and just a second later, everything shifted. He arrived at the Kung Lanchi teleportation hall, ready for the next stage of his journey. The young girl at the counter gave him the exact coordinates for the silent territory. His destination was the southern reef of Kung Lanchi, where the swift wind wings were causing a total disaster. These wind wing fighters have incredibly short incantation times, but with his eternal divine grace, level 50 enemies are practically instant kills. And so, he didn't hesitate for a second. He activated the swift wind wings and took off instantly. In that very moment, a pair of translucent wind wings manifested right behind him. Immediately, he transformed into a streak of emerald light, shooting directly toward the silent territory. In this desolate and quiet land, we see many professionals already gathering near the central zone. That is exactly where the necromancer boss is located, the primary respawn point. However, the professionals from the major guilds have declared that the Power Guild is now reserving the area. They ordered those without affiliations to leave, joining forces to block any independent professionals from entering. They seem to believe the world boss belongs solely to them, a bold claim, to be sure. When asked why they wouldn't let others in, the guild members blocking the path looked genuinely astonished by the question. Their logic was simple. This territory now belonged to the Power Guild, and that was that. They demanded everyone pick up the pace and leave, showing a level of arrogance that was truly hard to ignore. Many professionals were absolutely furious, but felt completely powerless, especially with the critical moment of the necromancer boss's respawn fast approaching. The time has come, and yet these two guilds are preventing anyone else from getting a share of the experience. They want all the loot for themselves, but suddenly, waves of black plague exhaling a heavy aura of death began to drift through the air. These dark mists started appearing across the entirety of the desolate and silent land. Soon, members of the guild began receiving desperate distress messages from their own comrades through the guild channel. The situation was turning grim, and it was clear their leader needed immediate help. They rushed to the scene, but when they finally arrived, the sight that met them left everyone in a state of total shock. Immense piles of corpses were scattered everywhere, and a foul, black liquid pooled across the ground. We see broken weapons discarded in the dirt, and the faces of the fallen still reflected the agony they felt in their final moments. Their eyes remained wide open in death, and to their horror, they found their own guild leader among the heap of bodies. This made them even more incredulous. After all, this was only a level 60 world boss they had defeated dozens of times before. They couldn't understand how it was possible for them to be wiped out so completely. But before they had any time to overthink the situation, the next moment revealed the truth. They finally laid eyes on the one responsible for this massacre, the necromancer boss, Rivdal. His body had grown 10 times larger than its usual size, looming over the battlefield like a nightmare. It was clear to everyone present that he had undergone a terrifying transformation. According to legend, world bosses have a very low probability of being corrupted by abyssal forces and entering a transformed state. In this state, the level and skills of the boss are increased in a truly horrific manner, which is never good news for the players. Even though the others couldn't escape, the necromancer boss, Rivdal, wasn't finished yet. He had summoned the queens of his war chief, leading us directly into the next stage of this chaos. The magical waves of necromancy have begun to spread across the battlefield. Right before the eyes of the nearby players, the arid ground was suddenly flooded by an endless tide of black water. It was a double plague. Within this dark water, countless ghostly hands appeared, turning into a formidable enemy. They reached out to grab the knees of every professional who was desperately trying to escape. And as the black water continued to spread, a scene appeared that made their hair stand on end. We see the corpses moving in a chaotic mess, as the bodies strewn across the ground were suddenly filled with necromantic energy. They stood up, picking up their broken swords and muttering familiar magical incantations. Only this time, they were fighting on behalf of the necromancer boss. At the very moment everyone began to despair, they suddenly heard the incredibly clear roar of dragons. In the following instant, a brilliant yellow light completely cleared the base of the area. A massive, astonishing dragon appeared, radiating an infinite, scorching heat. From the sky, we see its draconic roar descending upon the earth like a waterfall. The necromancer boss raised his head, his ghostly eyes reflecting the silhouette looming in the sky. The filthy black water that had been clinging to the player's knees was instantly boiled away by the dragon's fiery breath. At the speed of light, the dark tide transformed into mere wisps of black smoke. From high above, our protagonist let out a sigh of relief, glad that he had arrived just in time. He looked down at the necromancer boss and, without a second thought, launched an instantaneous celestial light dragon roar. As the dragon's roar erupted, the brightness was so intense his eyes momentarily lost focus. And yet, the boss wasn't dead. In fact, he hadn't even lost much health. This boss is certainly something else. He expected the celestial light dragon wouldn't kill him, but he thought it would at least take half his life. But now, he realized he would have to unleash several more celestial light dragon roars to finish this. He had finally engaged the necromancer boss, Rivendell, in a true test of strength. Even without the influence of his omniscient ear, this vital information began flashing rapidly before his eyes. Necromancer boss Rivendell, liquefaction level 200, with his current health points displayed right there. He had 100,000 mana, though he was currently suffering from sound and light damage. Our protagonist was stunned. Wasn't a level 200 enemy supposed to be more like level 60? He couldn't help but wonder how the level had spiked so suddenly and dramatically. Perhaps this liquefaction was some kind of enhanced version of the boss, a terrifying thought, really. Despite its power, a single celestial light dragon roar hadn't dealt more than 30,000 points of damage. He struggled to understand why, but fortunately, he still had his omniscient ear to guide him. He quickly discovered a hidden clue within the necromancer boss's list of formidable skills. The real problem stemmed from a passive ability known as the Immortal Body. Its effect was to reduce all incoming damage, unless it came from holy light, by a staggering amount. It cut damage by 50% and capped the maximum damage taken at just 9,999 points. To make matters worse, the creature was regenerating 5,000 health points every single second. This passive ability is, to be honest, a bit insane. It's no wonder the dragon's roar didn't wipe him out. Luckily, he had improved his wind damage the day before, or he wouldn't have been able to do much today. In the past, he had actually disliked wind damage, mainly because he felt it was far too weak. But now, we see that the situation has changed completely for our hero. Against enemies who cap single-hit damage, these multi-hit wind attacks have become extremely precious indeed. Right now, we see him murmuring incantations, in the middle of reciting a rank 7 wind-type spell, the noise of 1,000 thundering orchids. Even though he has 2 instant cast opportunities available, he wants to put his skills to the test. He wonders how long it will actually take to fully recite a rank 7 damage spell. As he begins, astonishing images start to manifest in the sky above. This display seems to have completely irritated the necromancer boss, who suddenly raises his massive blade, pointing it directly toward the heavens. An incredibly hoarse, guttural sound escapes from beneath his hood. In the next instant, a wave of black water surges forth like a dark tide from the sea. Thousands upon thousands of undead creatures, answering the necromancer's call, begin to rise from the earth once more. The giant sword in the boss's hand swings down, and a terrible necromantic energy explodes outward, flying straight toward the sky. This is one of his signature moves, a necromantic strike that vanishes into the clouds, and its power is truly terrifying to behold. He can even hear the air itself buckling under the pressure, emitting a dull, heavy groan from the sheer force of the attack. But our hero doesn't panic at all, because his incantation is already complete, aided by the passive influence of eternal divine grace. He finished the rank 7 spell in less than 10 seconds, and immediately, a violent torrent of wind begins to fall from the sky. The necromantic attack is instantly swallowed by the gale. Then, with a flick of his finger, the light intensifies and the tempest grows even more fierce. The strength of the wind increases brutally, more than doubling in power in a matter of moments. At this sight, many of the nearby professionals are left in a state of absolute shock. They wonder how strong this Grandmaster truly is, being able to chain 3 massive spells in the blink of an eye. Up in the air, he has used all 3 instant cast opportunities he had been saving up throughout the day. He feared a single round of Thundering Orchids wouldn't be enough to kill a level 200 boss, so he launched 3 consecutive rank 7 spells. He tells himself that the creature simply must die now, because if it doesn't, he'll have no choice but to run for his life. As it turns out, he was worrying far too much, as overlapping colors begin to flash violently above the necromancer's head. Massive damage indicators appear, though individually they aren't huge, usually around 1 or 2,000 points. They certainly add up. A critical hit lands for about 3,000, but the sheer frequency of the strikes is staggering, even in just the first wave. The necromancer's health bar is already down by 1/3, and the next 2 waves of the spell give him absolutely no time to recover. This time, the creature's life points are completely drained, and he is struck down at the speed of light. We see the notification: the 1-star world boss, Riven the Necromancer, has been defeated, granting him over 2 million experience points. He even receives an additional reward for slaying a higher-level enemy, adding another 1.5 million experience to his total. He also obtains 2,000 botting proficiency points and 20 exchangeable function points for his efforts. After 5 turns, he receives the special quest item he was looking for, the king's body. With his class change quest finally complete, he simply needs to return to the designated location to submit his success. He descends slowly from the sky to the spot where the battle took place, discovering a horde of glittering gold equipment. One item even shines with a brilliant platinum light, and he notices 2 skill books lying on the ground as well. He gathers all the treasures from the earth, and with a flap of his swift wind wings, his silhouette quickly vanishes from sight. After that, he makes his way back to the class change center. He arrives to submit his quest, finding the young attendant behind the counter looking quite bored. She looks up, noting that it hasn't even been an hour and a half since they last saw each other. She is stunned by his speed, but she leads him to the chamber containing the spiritual crystals for the class transition. He approaches the spiritual crystal and places both hands upon it, feeling the energy surge. The system congratulates him. His class change has been a complete success. He has now advanced to the rank of Ultimate Mage, gaining the new skills, Glacial Sword and Mana Loop. Good grief, it's always so dark. On this blue planet, fire and weaponry are the most common specializations for the mage profession. However, he doesn't mind the Glacial Sword and Mana Loop skills at all, as any ability in his hands becomes exceptionally precious. After his successful class change, he opens his personal panel and assigns all the attribute points he earned since reaching the spirit level. We should note that Rancet's magic spells are notorious for consuming massive amounts of mana. This applies to his previous rank 8 spells and even the forbidden ones, which, to be honest, are quite taxing. He has no desire to be caught in a mana storm, so he also increases his levels to become a top-tier industrial mage. Once he finishes assigning his points, we see he has risen 9 levels, thanks to the massive experience from the unified necromancer monster. That total also includes the experience gained from slaughtering that vast number of undead soldiers earlier. Fortunately, after raising his level cap, none of that hard-earned experience was lost. His total mana has now exploded to nearly 40,000 points, which is a staggering amount by any standard. Even without relying on the free casting from a mana storm, he can always count on his natural reserves. This allows him to cast Rancet's forbidden spells 3 or 4 times without breaking a sweat. He closes his menu with a hint of excitement, looking forward to the upcoming national professional examination. He wonders which school will actually have the right to recruit someone of his caliber. Later, he returns to his room and lays out everything he collected, starting with about a dozen pieces of equipment. Among them are several gold-level pieces and, most impressively, a single item shining with a platinum light. It is the black sword previously wielded by the Death Knight, a specialized piece of professional equipment. Only those in the warrior or knight classes can equip it, making it useless for him personally. The greatsword possesses a special pestilential corruption effect, and weapons with such unique traits are never cheap on the market. But he can't simply sell it, as the authorities maintain very strict control over the equipment of all professionals. Fortunately, we see that the authorities have opened a dedicated recycling channel for such items. The official building will buy high-quality equipment at a high price, but he can't exactly explain his situation to them just yet. So, he decides his only option is to store the gear in his personal space and wait until he's strong enough to deal with it later. Next, he pulls out 2 skill books, which are undoubtedly his most precious treasures. The first is the Explosive Hammer, a book for offensive and defensive skills that surely wouldn't go cheap on the open market. When he sees the second book, he is instantly excited, as it happens to be a magic skill book. It is the Summon Skeleton Soldier's skill, a true necromancy tome. Yes, actual necromancy. This is one of the rarest categories among all magic specializations, and he immediately chooses to use it. However, a cold system message appears, informing him of a learning error of all things. It turns out his profession does not match the required skill type, at least not within the associated orthodox profession system. To learn it, he must consume additional materials to perceive what is known as the magic quintessence. He wonders, quite naturally, what this perception of magic quintessence actually is. No matter how much he thinks about it, he can't find any information connected to the term. But he isn't in a rush. Even if he learned necromancy now, he would want to upgrade the skills to a much higher level. And to be honest, he doesn't have nearly enough skill points for that yet. A little later, he heads to the Jiangxing Treasure Pavilion and sells off his extra equipment for over 500,000 yuan. There, he learns from the owner that perceiving magic quintessence isn't something achieved through a single method. One could join the professional alliance or a major guild with official backing and use merit points, or perhaps exchange guild contributions. But as it turns out, there is another methodology entirely. One could achieve it at a famous professional academy or by obtaining excellent results on the National University entrance exam to earn rewards. Among those rewards, we find the perception of magic quintessence. After leaving the treasure pavilion, he headed straight back to the school. Once there, he activated the new function of his divine spinal talent, and after purchasing consecutive proficiency points 6 times, he gained over 500,000 points. Adding that to what he had saved before, he now has more than 800,000 proficiency points at his disposal. He opened the skill interface, clicked on the weapon skill he had just obtained, and upgraded it to the maximum level in a single stroke. If the fire element is based on raw damage and the wind element on attack speed, then weapon proficiency is the ultimate form of control. This level of proficiency, as it turns out, targets the very soul. It can ignite the target's soul in an eternal frost, rendering them completely unable to act. They become unable to use skills of unlimited duration, a terrifying prospect, really. Even though this particular skill doesn't actually deal any direct damage, it provides a control duration that is essentially infinite, provided it isn't broken by fire. It is permanent control. Next, we see another passive skill that appeared after his second promotion. Mana Loop. When you take damage, 10% of that damage is absorbed by your mana instead. With his constant additions, this survival skill has been completely transformed. It has reached the level of the immortal law body. For instance, when he takes damage, 40% of that damage is now absorbed by his mana. Furthermore, when he suffers elemental damage, it scales according to his affinity with that specific element. This increases the corresponding damage reduction even further. And finally, when he suffers an attack that would normally reduce his health points to 0, these damages will be completely absorbed by his mana instead. This effect, however, can only be triggered once every 30 days. It is incredibly powerful, offering not just high damage reduction, but a genuine chance to survive the impossible. It is a skill that allows one to escape death itself, providing a sense of absolute security. Previously, his survivability had been his greatest weakness, but now he felt he had nothing left to worry about. After adding the 2 new skills from his second promotion, he still has over 500,000 proficiency points remaining, more than enough to raise a skill to level 8. However, he found himself still weighing his options, unsure of which one to choose. While lost in thought, he eventually arrived at the director's office. When the old director saw him, a flicker of genuine surprise appeared in his eyes. He told the student how happy he was that he had finally overcome the recent challenges. Our protagonist offered no explanation and simply asked Director Zwa about the matter at hand. He had heard that the head professor had something urgent to discuss, something tied directly to his future. When asked what it was about, Zwa Qian's expression suddenly became quite serious. He explained that this morning, in the leveling zone on the outskirts of Jiangsheng, an unknown abyssal aura exploded, causing a reality-based trial dungeon to appear. And that dungeon, as it turns out, can only be accessed by magic professionals. He thought for a moment before asking the director what the advantages of a successful trial would be. Zwa Qian explained that the reward for this particular trial is a title. The title is the Abyss Defier, and while it grants no specific attributes, it serves as a key or a qualification, the qualification needed to enter the true abyss. This time, the rules for the mage-exclusive trial that appeared are deceptively simple, right there within the trial instance itself. 3 hours are all that is required, and strangely enough, there is no specific demand to go around slaughtering monsters. After a brief conversation, the director led him directly toward the entrance of the communication zone. However, we see so many people gathered here that the entrance itself has become completely invisible behind the crowd. As the crowd milled about, a sudden, sharp exclamation erupted from the very front of the entrance. He followed the sound only to see Zhang Yu emerging, looking very much like a lost soul who had seen too much. The moment Zhang Yu spotted her grandfather, Zhang Xian, waiting anxiously outside, her composure shattered. Tears began to flow instantly as she cried out that her grandfather hadn't made it out with her. She explained that there are simply too many monsters inside to kill, and staying in one place is out of the question. A constant stream of monsters attacks relentlessly, leaving nowhere to hide, until finally, her grandfather gave her 4 escape daggers. He then drew the full force of the monster's fire upon himself, allowing the others to make their escape. Upon hearing this, both Zhang Xian and the director fell into a heavy, somber silence. They both felt the weight of the situation at once, knowing this trial only authorizes magic-based professionals to enter. There are no tanks to absorb the damage and no healers to mend the wounds, a recipe for disaster, really. By now, it was becoming clear that the difficulty of this trial was at least a level 1, if not higher. At that moment, people were being teleported out of the entrance in a constant wave of screams and chaos. Cries for help followed one after another, and many of the fallen were covered in blood, making for an extremely gruesome scene. These people, much like Zhang Xian's group, were among the very first to venture into the trial instance. Meanwhile, Zwa Qian sat in the chair beside him, watching the unfolding tragedy with a look of prideful satisfaction. It seems they were quite helpless. Not only did they underestimate the difficulty, but they didn't even have a guide to help them. "I am so sorry, my friend Zhang Xian," the director whispered, his voice heavy with regret. The old director looked as if he had aged decades in a single instant, consumed by a deep sense of self-reproach and guilt. However, while everyone else was paralyzed by worry, our protagonist decided to step directly into the trial instance. Zhu Oqiang didn't even have time to react before he was struck by a sudden, cold wave of shock. After all, knowing full well this was an extremely difficult trial, the young man still dared to throw himself in alone. At that moment, the other academy students could only smirk, certain he was simply marching toward his own death. They reasoned that for a novice who just finished his class transition, entering a trial of this difficulty is beyond dangerous. Meanwhile, as he crossed through the glowing barrier of the instance, a system notification flashed before his eyes. He had officially entered the special trial instance, the city of time, Felix I. Opening his eyes, he found himself in total darkness, where no stars touched the black sky, only a scarlet blood moon hanging above. Even though the light was incredibly poor, he could see his surroundings perfectly thanks to his divine skill, omniscient ear. The requirement for passage was simple: survive for 3 hours within the ruins of Felix I. The countdown began immediately, 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 49 seconds remaining. A friendly tip appeared, advising him to stop his heart and hold his breath if possible. It seems he hates noise, a realization that hit him the moment he heard a faint, echoing voice. Based on this hint, he deduced that the monsters in this place likely track their prey through sound. As he was lost in thought, a strange, unsettling noise suddenly broke the silence nearby. He turned to see several dark masses approaching, including some eerie, smiling gaps floating in the air. The dark creatures are known as light shadows, while those floating, smiling voids are called light ears. From the perspective of any normal professional, avoiding combat entirely would undoubtedly be the best solution here. But our protagonist had every intention of taking a different path, reasoning that we cannot simply hide from the darkness forever. He decided to use fire, believing that if he simply killed them all, there would be no need to hide or run away. And so, in his hands, a brilliant, searing light began to glow with the heat of a furnace. The rank 4 fire-type area of effect skill, Flame Tempest, was initiated almost instantly. He launched 3 consecutive attacks, and with a roar of heat, the shadow monsters approaching him were set ablaze. They were all killed instantly, but a second later, he heard even more whispers echoing through the dark. As they closed in on him, he raised his hand once more and, after a short incantation, prepared his next move. He summoned the Red Demon, that strange racier monster treasure he had been given earlier. Then, he opened his skill interface, fully intending to invest his hard-earned points right then and there. His target this time was the formidable rank 8 fire magic, a bold choice, to be sure. It was a heavy price, requiring him to consume 500,000 skill points in a single go. Immediately, his heavenly light fire skill progressed to a whole new level of power. He obtained a new destiny, the Fire Spirit Avatar, a transformation of immense potential. The casting time was now instantaneous, though it came with a 3-day cooldown period. While the Fire Spirit effect is active, he becomes completely immune to all forms of physical damage. He is also immune to all fire-type damage and, quite conveniently, gains the ability to fly. In this state, when he casts fire skills, his critical hit chance and critical damage both increase by a staggering 100%. Furthermore, his attacks now ignore 50% of the target's magic resistance. Any spells that previously required a long incantation become instant and no longer consume any mana at all. This state of ascension lasts for 3 minutes, which, in a place like this, is more than enough time to cause some chaos. With this, he can now manipulate the very elements of fire to trigger a massive, devastating explosion. We have to admit, this skill is truly impressive and quite a rare find in a world like this. He recalled having only one other incantation-type skill in mind, and now, he could finally see its ultimate form. The power surged right to his fingertips as he was enveloped in a dark white flame, his hands burning with violent intensity. Almost instantly, he felt as though he had become the flame itself, merging with the heat in that very moment. The ground where he originally stood began to vanish as an immense wave of shadow damage rushed toward him. Without even the chance to let out a scream, the darkness was vaporized the moment his supreme sublimation was complete. Every shadow and dark monster in the City of Light was thrown into a frenzy as the temperature spiked, and he took to the air, utilizing the newfound ability to fly granted to him by his fire spirit state. His flight speed was easily on par with the swiftest winds, perhaps because the heat had risen so sharply, illuminating everything in sight. The terrifying creature lurking beneath the city was thoroughly provoked, letting out a staggering, thunderous roar of failure. A massive, gray shadow tore itself from the earth, reaching directly for the white fire glowing in the sky. However, upon contact, the shadow was instantly charred to black coal by the incredible flames, further enraging the giant hidden underground. This time, a tremendous tremor shook the land, and we see 8 scarlet giants rising from the abyss, actually a single, massive spider made of shadow. This boss is a full 20 levels higher than the altered undead knight we saw earlier. And naturally, all of its attributes far exceed those of the knight in every possible way. Under normal circumstances, most players entering this trial would never encounter such a high-level monster. It was his presence alone that provoked it. Which leads us to the current situation. Once he kills this thing, the dungeon should finally be over, or so one would hope. With about a minute and a half left in his sublimated state, he reached out toward the demonic spider in the abyss and slowly detonated his power. An instant later, every fire element between heaven and earth was pushed to the limit, and the city's temperature soared to millions of degrees. The staggering temperature has forced a scream from the demonic shadow spider. Its health bar drops at a visible rate. Millions of points will hit zero in a blink as it desperately tries to escape, but it is far too late. The massive explosion triggered by his supreme sublimation has suddenly erupted like a globe of brilliant white light. Much like a nuclear blast, it expands rapidly, illuminating the entire city of night. Immense shadow demons are swept away as the entire temple space is filled with a blinding glow. The white lights, focused by such high temperatures, continue to burn with searing intensity. We see him watching this scene, looking understandably shocked by the sheer scale of it. Level 8 fire magic. The power behind it is simply too explosive to put into words. Deep down, he believes even the celestial-eyed dragon lizard couldn't be more impressive than this. Suddenly, he realizes that this particular technique doesn't even have a name yet. After a moment of reflection, he recalls a very similar situation, the 6 paths attacking Konoha, and thinks of a certain technique of divine retribution. Konoha was leveled and completely destroyed, much like the scene we see before us now. A smile plays on his lips as he decides that, from now on, this technique shall be called Divine Fire Retribution. A voice announces his success, congratulating him on finishing the time trial dungeon of Jellicane. It turns out he has managed to unlock and complete the hidden ending of this trial. By slaying the monster, the so-called kind shadow demon, he has earned the new title of Conqueror of the Abysses. From this day forward, this special trial dungeon will be known as the Abysses of the Blue Star. His feat will be celebrated forever. To be honest, his intervention was so powerful it essentially broke the dungeon itself. At the same time, he managed to save Janaya's second grandfather before being teleported out of the trial. When he finally opens his eyes, he finds himself back outside the city of Janaya, standing on a lush, vibrant beach. At that very moment, everyone waiting outside the dungeon entrance was left in a state of absolute shock. It had, after all, been less than 3 minutes since he first stepped into this challenging trial dungeon. How could he have finished so quickly? And more importantly, who was that he was carrying in his arms? The figure looked strangely familiar until Janaya suddenly cried out, recognizing him as her second grandfather. In that instant, the realization dawned on everyone present. He had actually succeeded in saving the man. Seeing that her grandfather was still alive, Janaya was overcome with emotion and instantly burst into tears. She offered him her thanks, words that, to be honest, were not easily heard coming from her lips. Watching her like this, he couldn't help but feel a bit of a pang for her situation. For the last 3 years at school, Janaya had always been the very definition of a cold, distant beauty. It was usually impossible to get a smile out of her, let alone a sincere word of gratitude. Janaya grew so flustered and annoyed by his observation that she actually stomped her foot in frustration. She certainly hadn't expected him to have the presence of mind to tease her at a time like this. Just then, the director stepped forward to offer him some words of comfort and reassurance. He suggested that leaving the dungeon early was likely a mistake, especially with 3 hours still remaining on the clock. Our protagonist didn't bother to explain. Instead, an announcement began to echo throughout the entire surrounding area. To the utter bewilderment of the crowd, the system congratulated the challenger for successfully clearing the level. It announced the completion of the special dungeon, the City of Light within Jellicane, marking the end of the trial. With a final time of 2 minutes and 42 seconds, he had achieved a staggering S-rank evaluation. From this point forward, no other professionals would ever be able to enter this dungeon to progress again. The record for this dungeon's completion was officially closed and transferred to the hallowed pantheon of history. Everyone stood there, utterly bored, or perhaps just stunned, as they stared at him as if he were some kind of monster. The principal was completely paralyzed. He knew this young man had potential, but he never expected it to be this immense. He hadn't just finished the level, he had actually entered the pantheon of world dungeons of the White Planet. To put that in perspective, in the entire history of the White Planet, fewer than 1,000 names have ever been etched onto that list. It is, quite simply, the highest glory any professional could ever hope to achieve. At only 18 years old, he had secured his place in the pantheon of world records for dungeon raids. In that moment, we see him looking out at a crowd that felt like a sea of losers by comparison. At the same time, a professor from the Taiangsui Academy approached Oh Jun with a very specific proposal. He invited him to join the Taiangsui Academy, even jokingly suggesting they could provide him with a girlfriend. It was a special admission offer, and in an instant, everyone present was left with their mouths hanging open. The Taiangsui Academy is the second best school in the province and ranks among the top 100 in the entire country. Even the principal seemed to lose his head for a moment after hearing such a prestigious offer being made. This type of special admission credit is incredibly rare, to say the very least. Only a handful of schools out of 281 are even qualified to grant them. The principal noted that Taiangsui is indeed an excellent choice and suggested he should seriously consider accepting. Just when everyone assumed he would accept immediately, he did the unthinkable and flatly refused. This time, even Oh Jun was caught a bit off guard by the sheer decisiveness of the rejection. From his perspective, this was an unprecedented honor that most would give anything to receive. How was it possible that this boy wasn't feeling even slightly flattered by the attention? The professor urged him to think it over carefully, warning that this might be the only chance of his lifetime. After hearing those words, he couldn't help but let out a small, mocking laugh. He noted that, in principle, the professor could have at least tried to leave a better impression. Perhaps then, and only then, would he have considered joining the Tianxui Academy. The principal felt a sharp pang in his heart upon hearing that this was supposedly the boy's only chance. To be honest, those words felt incredibly fake, yet they were inexplicably infuriating to hear. Oh Jun gave him a long, deep look before turning around and leaving the team behind. Over the next 10 days, he didn't forget his goal, though he practically never left his home to train. The main reason was simple. The training zones and dungeons around Jiangsheng were already far below his level. As the exam approached, other students rushed to prep classes, but he spent those 10 days preparing in private. Later, he went out to exchange the resources he had gathered and received a text from the tower bank. His account had received a transfer of 749,680 yuan, bringing his total balance to over 1.2 million. And so, his current savings had officially crossed the prestigious 1 million mark. With a balance exceeding 1 million detected, his divine talent began to react. New functionalities were unlocked, and with a racing heart, he opened his talent interface to see the changes. He could now spend 1 million Blue Star coins to evolve a rank 8 skill into an enhanced version of that same rank, greatly increasing its power and effects, an upgrade that left him utterly stunned. It seemed his talent had truly transformed into a pay-to-win system. Not only could money speed up his skill point acquisition, but it could now evolve the skills themselves. He opened his personal panel and checked his skill point column, which sat at 974,639 points. The free skill points he had accumulated over those 10 days had already risen to over 1 million. We see that he hadn't forgotten the small goal he set for himself a month ago on Awakening Day, to push his fireball skill to its absolute limit. And now, that modest little objective was finally within his reach. He wondered if he should pay to speed things up, so he opened the payment interface to check the costs. After seeing the exchange rate, spending 100,000 daxia yuan just to get 80,000 skill points, he practically froze in his tracks. It cost more than 1 yuan to buy a single skill point, a price he wasn't quite willing to pay just yet. He simply couldn't afford to be reckless, or that million yuan in his account wouldn't last him very long at all. By the following day, when he opened his personal panel again, his skill point balance had finally crossed into 7 figures. He navigated through his skills and stopped at the interface for his rank 8 Fire Spirit incarnation. Everything was ready, and the system asked if he wanted to spend 1 million skill points to raise the skill to rank 9. He didn't hesitate for a second, using the one-click adjustment to consume the full 1,000,000 points. His Fire Spirit incarnation officially evolved into rank 9, now known as the Baiyuan Tianyan. At this stage, he realized that reaching the absolute peak of rank 9 was now tantalizingly close. He previewed the next promotion, but the requirement for the following rank was a staggering 10 million skill points. Things were getting interesting. Even if the requirements eventually reached hundreds of millions, he was determined to keep going. At this point, his ultimate goal was nothing less than total mastery over every elemental magic. Everything had to be upgraded to the max, and so, the next morning, he arrived at Tianhe to take the national professional exam. Outside the testing center, a loud announcement rang out, calling for the attention of all candidates for the year 2024. The unified entrance exam for the national professional colleges was finally about to begin. The staff ordered everyone to line up and pass through the gates one by one. This exam would offer different tiers of difficulty, specifically tailored to match the levels of the candidates. Shortly after, we see him open the door, and a golden baton icon slowly begins to manifest right above his head. The entire examination hall erupted in a collective gasp of pure shock. People were shouting in disbelief, calling out that it was a gold star and practically worshipping the sight of it. At that very moment, a female examiner approached him to offer her assistance. He followed her and quickly spotted the entrance to examination room number 1. More than 20 people were already standing there, waiting in front of the entrance. And just like his, the stars floating above their heads were all of brilliant, shining gold. These were clearly the geniuses cultivated by elite schools and high-ranking, wealthy families. However, when they noticed a new face among them, they couldn't help but look down on him. They whispered about him being a candidate from Jiangsheng, wondering aloud what kind of strange place that even was. They claimed they had never heard of it, even questioning if there was some sort of mistake with the door. It seemed impossible to them that such a godforsaken place could produce a gold star, but he ignored their mockery and focused on his own path. He prepared to register his information, but just as he was about to ring the bell, an arrogant voice called out from behind him. The stranger asked him if it had been difficult to reach level 25, sounding quite unimpressed. He offered some friendly advice, warning him not to choose the nightmare difficulty unless he wanted to be slaughtered by the monsters inside. Our protagonist turned slightly and saw that the one speaking was a young man with bright red hair. This red-haired boy was clearly making a scene, causing the other candidates to whisper and laugh amongst themselves. They called him Brother Kai, reminding everyone that even among gold stars, there are levels of greatness. After all, not everyone could reach level 29 as easily as he had. The red-haired boy was secretly delighted by the attention, though he seemed far more interested in impressing a beautiful girl standing nearby. But when he looked back at the young woman, he saw nothing but a look of pure annoyance in her eyes. The young Jusha, who was anything but warm, told him flatly that he didn't need to use such methods to get her attention. At that same moment, we see the young woman turn her gaze toward our protagonist. A second later, an expression of utter disbelief washed over her face. Because as his hand touched the bell, a level number suddenly manifested on the floating status bar. Level 42. In an instant, the bored chatter of the crowd died down into a heavy silence. Zhao Kai stared at that level 42 on the display, unable to process what he was seeing. Suddenly, he felt as if an invisible hand had delivered a sharp slap right across his face. He turned to the teacher, complaining that he couldn't select a difficulty and that the system wasn't working. He claimed he wanted to choose the hardest mode but couldn't, as if the system had encountered a bug. It was then that the examiner finally snapped out of his stunned silence. He asked for a minute, promising to take a closer look at what was happening. To be honest, he hadn't expected to believe the level this young man was displaying. It really was level 42, and he wondered where on earth such a monster could have come from. After a series of checks, the examiner in charge of registration was breaking into a cold sweat as he realized the system was perfectly fine. The reason the difficulty couldn't be chosen was that the system's core code only allowed selections for levels between 25 and 30. In short, this level 42 monster had effectively broken the student admission system just by showing up. The examiner paused for a moment, realizing this was a decision he simply couldn't make on his own. Unable to proceed, he turned and ran at full speed toward the heart of the testing center. Upon hearing about this very peculiar situation, his superior fell into a long, thoughtful silence. He wondered why they hadn't found such a talented candidate in decades, as if the world had simply stopped producing them. Since they had finally found another one today, he decided they would grant him a special exemption. He ordered them to reactivate a difficulty level from the past, leaving the other employees with looks of pure shock on their faces. One of them spoke up, warning Deputy Director Lee that this particular difficulty had caused far too many accidents in the past. He argued it was simply too difficult for these candidates, but Li Yuhan just rubbed his head, already making up his mind. He believed times had changed, and that for a boy like this, the standard combat mode was nothing more than a joke. To ensure fairness, he instructed them to inform all 22 examination centers across Tianhe of the change. He ordered the simultaneous activation of purgatory mode, leaving his subordinates staring at him like deer in headlights. A subordinate pointed out that if the deputy director activated the abyssal mode, those without a special abyssal title wouldn't even be able to select it. Li Yuhan simply waved his hand, telling them to go ahead and publish their abyssal titles then. It was a simple rule. Those who didn't possess an abyssal title would be barred from choosing purgatory mode. He noted that if this level 42 boy hadn't passed special trials before and lacked a title, he would have to settle for nightmare mode. But they couldn't wait. Li Yuhan was absolutely resolved to see this through. Though the staff was hesitant, they had no choice but to obey, and the examiner immediately hurried back with the new orders. Returning to exit number 1, he announced that due to the addition of purgatory mode, all candidates could now reselect their difficulty. As we watched the crowd, the examiner saw 3 hands slowly rise into the air. The young woman, Lan Rui, raised her right hand with an expression of perfect, icy calm. At the same time, Zhao Kai and one of his followers also raised their hands to accept the challenge. The examiner wasn't entirely surprised, as these 3 had the highest level so far, and Zhao Kai and his friend held rare professions. As for Lan Rui, her profession was something even rarer, which, naturally, made things much more interesting. In reality, all 3 candidates seemed to possess the necessary confidence to face the daunting challenge of purgatory mode. The examiner instructed them to present their abyssal titles, noting that once confirmed, he would adjust the difficulty accordingly. A moment later, we see 5 large black characters manifest above the heads of the 3, including Lan Rui. As an abyssal challenger, Zhao Kai couldn't help but shoot a provocative look in our protagonist's direction. His gaze seemed to say that no matter how high your level is, if you can't pass the professional trials, you'll never truly change. Without that specific title, choosing purgatory mode was, quite simply, an impossibility. At that moment, it felt as though every eye in the room had turned toward him, waiting for a response. He was already feeling a bit bored by the time the examiner asked if he actually possessed the required title. Beside him, Zhao Kai was practically beaming with joy, clearly convinced that the boy had nothing to show. He mocked him openly, asking if he even knew how to display a title he obviously didn't have. The examiner, however, remained professional and didn't say much else to fuel the fire. He simply told him to open his personal panel and look slowly through the column under his own name. A list of titles would appear there. Following the instructions, he had a sudden realization and did exactly as he was told. He quickly opened his title column, but then, his finger slipped, an accident that changed everything. He clicked the very first title, and suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, followed by an explosion of golden brilliance. A string of characters appeared above his head, Pantheon of World Dungeon record holders. The crowd was stunned, staring at the 24-karat golden glow and wondering what kind of legendary title this could possibly be. It was a magnificent sight, yet seeing the shocked expressions on everyone's faces, he felt nothing but confusion. He wondered why everyone was looking at him that way, fearing for a second that he might have picked the wrong title. But then he looked up, saw the string of words floating above him, and realized, well, he had certainly made an impression. It was certainly hard to miss, and to be honest, even he was a bit surprised by the spectacle. He felt a bit awkward, realizing he wasn't exactly familiar with how these things worked. In his haste to open the title menu, he had accidentally selected the wrong one. In his mind, he assumed that a person should only be able to display one title at a time. He figured that if he chose Abyssal Conqueror, the previous Pantheon title would simply disappear. But he was still quite inexperienced. As soon as he selected the Conqueror title, a second line of text manifested right above the first. There it was, Abyssal Conqueror, along with all the formidable effects that came with it. The Golden Hall of Fame title began to glow with a new, piercing red light, pulsing with abyssal energy. A dark, swirling aura filled the space, giving him an air of absolute, undeniable authority. The crowd was stunned once again, wondering if he was doing this on purpose just to show off. They couldn't help but ask themselves how one person could possibly possess so many ultra-rare titles. Everyone present had heard of the Hall of Fame title, even if they had never seen it in person. It was the ultimate honor for any professional on Blue Star, yet here it was, wrapped in a sinister, dark atmosphere. And then there was the Conqueror title, which radiated an overwhelming pressure. What could that even be? While the others were mere challengers, he was already labeled a conqueror, which felt a bit unfair, didn't it? Seeing their shocked reactions, our protagonist found himself at a bit of a loss for words. He truly wanted to keep a low profile, but the examiner was feeling the pressure even more than he was. Standing before this 18-year-old prodigy, the man felt as though his own authority had completely evaporated. He noted that the title alone qualified the student for the Abyssal Dungeon, mostly because he had never seen anything like it. As he spoke, the examiner couldn't help but feel a growing sense of inadequacy in the face of such power. The examiner had been on the job for 4 years, yet even he had no idea how one actually earns the Abyssal Conqueror title. Seeing the commotion, our protagonist quietly deactivated that flashy, 24-karat Hall of Fame title. He gave a simple yes in response, leaving Kai standing there in a state of complete, stunned silence. The man had the distinct impression that the person standing before him might actually be an abyssal monster disguised as a human. Meanwhile, the curly-haired girl nearby found it impossible to look away from him. Handsome, powerful, and mysterious, precisely the qualities that tend to draw people in. In this moment, those traits had manifested perfectly within a single person. Even a talent like her, considered one of the best in all of Donjiang, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration and respect. It was just then that the public announcement system crackled back to life. Attention, all candidates. The National Unified Entrance Exam for Higher Vocational Colleges of the year 3024 is about to begin. The exam starts in 5 minutes. Please proceed to the assembly area immediately. A moment later, everyone was enveloped in light as they were transported into the assembly hall. After a brief period of darkness, he opened his eyes to find himself in a place of pure, blinding white. He stood in a space without limits, and at that same moment, the exam instructions echoed directly in his mind. Candidate Ling Li, in 1 minute, a monster will manifest before you. It will be a level 30 governor, currently immobile and harmless. Your task is to eliminate it as quickly as possible. The faster you are, the higher your score will be. After hearing the rules, he felt a brief flash of boredom, followed by a wave of genuine disappointment. He wondered if this was really what they called purgatory level, and as the governor appeared, he simply raised a hand and launched a fireball. It took him a mere 2.5 seconds to eliminate it completely, as the results flashed across the grand stage. Everyone else seemed to be doing just fine, but there was a slight problem. They had only managed to reduce the monster's health by half, eliminating it in a single blow. To be honest, sitting there in the dungeon space, the examiner felt a growing sense of irritation. About 20 seconds later, the rankings began to stabilize, and a moment later, another name appeared on the leaderboards. In first place, candidate Ling Li completed the first round in a staggering 2 seconds and 36 milliseconds. He earned a perfect 1,000 points, while in second place, Qi Xiaoying finished in 23 seconds and 27 milliseconds, earning 877.6 points. Outside the primary examination center of Tiana City, the atmosphere was electric. A massive screen displayed the exam's progress in real time, and we see the crowd erupting in pure astonishment. People pointed at the top spot, wondering who this unknown student was and how he could possibly have such an incredible lead. A powerful boss monster had appeared in the very first round, and not just any high-level threat. It was a celestial tier boss. Meanwhile, back at the testing center, a subordinate turned to ask a question. He asked Vice Director Li if the boy's 1,000 points truly represented a perfect score for this round. Li Yuanjing looked up, noting that killing a goblin monster of that caliber in under 10 seconds was nearly unheard of. The result was indeed perfect, a rule he himself had established when designing the exam. To achieve a perfect score on purgatory difficulty was something he hadn't witnessed in many years. Suddenly, the large screen in the main conference hall flickered and brightened. It was about to broadcast the recording of Ling Li's performance during that first round. As the scene replayed, everyone leaned in, deeply curious to see exactly how he had pulled it off. After watching the footage, it was clear it really only took him 2 seconds to clear the first test. The entire conference hall fell into a stunned, heavy silence as the reality of the feat sank in. Li Yuanjing asked to replay it once more, finding the display of power a bit hard to believe himself. As the second broadcast began, Li Yuanjing added a brief comment to the room. The footage was slowed down, and with that adjustment, everyone was finally able to see the truth clearly this time. A goblin monster appeared on screen, and in an instant, it was standing right before the boy. Suddenly, 5 or 6 enormous fireballs, each the size of a wash basin, materialized out of thin air. Those fireballs struck like bullets, bombarding the goblin monster with an incredibly high frequency. The monster's health points plummeted at a terrifying speed, vanishing in just 2 short seconds. The damage was truly staggering. It was the second-level skill of a fire mage, known as Flame Explosion. But it was strange. How could he possibly cast that skill so many times with such astonishing efficiency? There was only one real possibility. This boy's Flame Explosion skill was instantaneous. He had likely awakened a hidden talent at the same time he received his profession. At that moment, we see everyone's eyes fixed intently on the screen. While all the other geniuses of Dongjiang were doing their absolute best, our protagonist was simply sitting on the ground, drawing circles in the dirt. At first, he had thought the national entrance exam would be a purgatory-level challenge that would force him to be serious. But who would have believed it would be child's play? The second test only featured 20 to 1,000 goblins. He felt almost insulted, a single flame cyclone, and they would all be dead instantly. The observers at the massive gates of the examination center found his casual attitude quite amusing to witness. Li Yuanjing looked at the large screen and couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. He wondered if the boy was capable of dealing area of effect damage, and then he paused to consider it. This hypothesis was immediately accepted by many of the people watching. After all, despite his performance, this boy technically held an ordinary profession. He simply cannot be compared to those with rare professions, and even less so to those with legendary ones. In the next instant, all the dungeons reset, each spawning 20 new goblins. However, at that exact moment, an extremely fierce red light flared up across the great stage of the examination center. We see endless waves of heat enveloping a brilliant residence and falling from the sky, violently striking the 20 goblin monsters. And just like that, the 20 goblins seemed to say their goodbyes as they were instantly obliterated. This time, Li Yuanjing found it impossible to remain seated. He vanished immediately as the rankings shifted once again. Candidate 001 had claimed the first-place position. He passed the second round, earning a perfect 1,000 points in a mere 10.1 seconds. Every official in Dongjiang was left utterly speechless by the display. Some people even began swearing right in front of the boss, which was quite a sight, to be honest. Their usual humble and civilized daily personas vanished in an instant. Li Yuanjing took a deep breath and signaled with his hand to check the national archives of over 600 past entrance exams. He needed to know what was the best historical record ever achieved in the world. His subordinate heard the request and stood up immediately with visible excitement. He hurried to comply, clearly realizing that this candidate had just set a monumental record. A historical record had been broken. However, Li Yuanjing ordered the supervision group to conduct an in-depth investigation. He wondered if there had been some sort of technical glitch within the dungeon itself. Could this record be due to a bug? He ordered them to check the boy's status and equipment to ensure he hadn't cheated. Very quickly, the instructions Li Yuanjing gave to his subordinates received a definitive response. The technical department reviewed everything once more, leaving no stone unturned. There were no anomalies to be found. Both the status and the data of the dungeon were perfectly normal. He had earned this record honestly, and the subordinate in charge of the report was visibly trembling with excitement. Li Yuanjing was in a remarkably good mood, and the news his subordinate reported next only served to heighten his spirits. The subordinate explained that they had also consulted the relevant archives of the tower. During the national entrance exam of the year 2876, a candidate from Shanghai set a record of 10.48 seconds in the second round of purgatory difficulty. This record was of immense importance to the university, as it hadn't been broken by anyone in 100 years. And we should mention that the candidate who set that legendary record was none other than Zheng Yingxiong. Upon hearing that name, a cold silence swept through the entire conference room as everyone held their breath. Li Yuanjing was stunned, wondering if they were truly speaking of the 21st god of war of their tower. This Zheng Yingxiong was a figure the subordinate had long admired. Li Yuanjing felt a bit agitated, realizing, perhaps a little late, that he was becoming far too emotional. He gazed at the giant screen with shining eyes, knowing this boy had just written a new chapter in the tower's history. At that moment, an old man spoke up, suggesting that this brutal record was, in his opinion, a bit unfair to the boy. Li Yuanjing turned to him, curious as to why he would say such a thing. The man raised a finger and pointed toward the record list in the upper right corner. He asked if they hadn't noticed that it was, in fact, a perfect record. The gap between his score and the second place was staggering, and Li Yuanjing instantly understood the man's point. Li Yuanjing smiled with a touch of amazement, noting that while it seemed unfair, the rules were uniform across the country. Even though he helped write the evaluation guidelines, who could have imagined a record as exaggerated as this boy's would ever appear? Chi Gogen has spoken, and it seems he believes that the truly strong will always find a way to shine. He is convinced that, based on what we've seen so far, Dongzhang's total victory this year is practically guaranteed. Without a shadow of a doubt, that first-place spot will be returning to them. But we have to wonder, how exactly did he manage to achieve that unprecedented record of 0.1 seconds? What skill did he use before? It appeared to be a fourth-order fire-type ability. Normally, a Flame Tempest requires 5 seconds of casting time, yet he unleashed it instantaneously. This observation from Chi Gogen immediately caused a stir, bringing a sense of relief to everyone watching. Even if this boy seems like an ordinary master, a professional's true strength shouldn't be judged solely by their class. One must also consider their innate talents and, of course, the synergy of their equipment. But a moment later, as they looked back at the center of the stage, their expressions froze in collective disbelief. Because there he was, sitting on the ground, calmly gnawing on a fatty chicken back and looking quite happy about it. Even though the system indicates the second round is over and the third will begin in 1 minute, he remains unbothered. He doesn't seem to have a care in the world as he quietly listens to the rules for the third round. And we must admit, this third round actually seems to make a bit of sense. While the first 2 rounds tested explosive power against single targets and groups, this is different. This round is designed to test his overall sustained output and total combat strength. He analyzed the situation internally. Since the dungeon's health points are infinite, time is the only real limit. If he wants to maximize his damage, he realizes he'll have to manage his strength very carefully. With only 10 seconds left until the start, the dungeon begins to shift and react. In the very next instant, a green tornado begins to form at the summit of the dungeon. The wind shapes the lamps as if they were real, constantly lashing against the skin and flesh of the dungeon boss. It is a fourth-order wind spell, the Tempest Cyclone. He chose this specific spell because it provides the highest total damage possible from a single cast in a long-term battle. The buildup is slow, but the damage scales quickly and lasts for a very long time. Once a Tempest Cyclone is summoned, it will rage for half an hour before finally dissipating. For the dungeon boss, a heavy monster that simply stands there, it is a relentless and punishing assault. It can continue to inflict damage steadily for the full 30 minutes. Utilizing this mechanic, he continues to summon more and more Tempest Cyclones. 5, 10, 20. The number of cyclones surrounding the boss increases at a truly terrifying speed. Dozens of Tempest Cyclones are now attacking the governor of the dungeon simultaneously. The frequency of damage being dealt every single second is, quite frankly, staggering. This scene has left countless people in the examination center watching in absolute awe. However, at that very moment, a strange problem occurs with the rankings. His damage output, which had been in first place, suddenly drops to 0. His rank disappears entirely, an abnormal situation that everyone in the center notices immediately. But the scene that follows leaves them even more stunned than before. They look directly at the center of the great stage, toward that giant governor. Its immense body begins to slowly clear away, or rather, it is being erased. A strange new rank appears for our candidate, Inga. It is an unprecedented situation. The monster that was supposed to have infinite health has been killed by him. Li Yuanjing frowns deeply, clearly troubled. What exactly is happening here? Which mechanism has malfunctioned? We see the staff begin an immediate investigation. In an instant, the entire examination center staff responsible for maintaining the rankings broke into a cold sweat. They were all well aware that if this wasn't handled correctly, it could turn into a major disaster. However, the results of the investigation showed that there was, surprisingly, no technical problem at all. Suddenly, everyone was left perplexed, until Gogen seemed to realize something and called out to Ling Li. Does the monster you created truly have infinite health points? Li Yuanjing shook his head. Of course not. If it truly had infinite health, wouldn't it be genuinely invincible? Which, naturally, would be impossible. Even if the giant governor appears to have infinite health, there must be a condition for it to be destroyed. But what is that condition? To be honest, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Gogen returned to his thoughts for a moment. Not long after, his eyes lit up with realization. I think I understand. If everything happens as I suspect, this boy is about to create yet another miracle. He is chasing a record that has remained unbroken until this very day. He is the first to ever defeat the invincible. Could that really be the case? Li Yuanjing called Xia Shu to ask for further clarification on the matter. However, the only response he received was a confirmation that everything was functioning normally. As for how he was able to kill a giant governor with infinite health, well, that remained a mystery. He knew nothing. Surprisingly, Li Yuanjing didn't lose his temper over the lack of answers. Even the details reported by Xiaoshu only served to further confirm his and Gogen's growing suspicions. The rest was no longer his concern. Li Yuanjing simply continued giving out his instructions. He was preparing a report for the capital. It was time to let them handle this matter. After all, the architecture and basic logic of our National University entrance exam dungeon are only accessible to them. At this moment, only 2.5 minutes remained before the final round of the test begins. And finally, Li Yuanjing and Qi Gogen received the new updates sent by the General Administration of Education in the capital. The deputy director announced they had received a message regarding the cause of the accident and the recommended treatment. It explained the reason why the dungeon monster encountered by the candidate Lin Li, the giant governor, was actually killed. It turns out that he had triggered the creature's own hidden death mechanism. In its underlying architecture, this monster technically has a limit of infinite health points. However, it possesses exactly 1 million health points. Every time it is attacked, it loses just 1 point. After being hit 1 million times, its actual health bar is reduced to 0 and it dies naturally. The colleagues from the technical department in the capital have already requested proper handling from their superiors. The candidate did not use any abnormal methods or cheats for the test. He simply, and quite accidentally, triggered the monster's specific death mechanism. Therefore, this test must be considered a success, and he should receive the maximum possible score. Furthermore, a high-ranking official is very interested in Lin Li and has asked to see the footage of his next test. Li Yuanjing and Qi Gogen froze for a second before a look of joy finally returned to their stern faces. In the final minute of the third test, Lin Li's name appeared once again at the very top of the rankings. His current spiritual production was listed as unlimited, with a score of 2,000 points earned. What exactly is that? No one expected him to return and deal damage that defies all conventional logic. No precise number has been recorded for him, and so, we hear the announcement for all candidates to prepare for the fourth test. It will begin in 30 seconds. The rules for this specific examination are about to be announced. We see the candidates' expressions shift as the third round officially comes to a close. Almost everyone is currently at the Mana Secondary School, and this time, there will be no break between the third and fourth rounds. At that very moment, the rules for the fourth round are officially broadcast to everyone. This particular test is designed to push their general combat competencies to the absolute limit. In 20 seconds, a Goblin King will appear directly before each of them. The monster's attributes are defined as follows: 50,000 health points, with armor and magic resistance both set at 1,000. This monster won't attack personally, but it will constantly summon its light squad to strike at the candidates. The Goblin Light Squad is comprised of 4 different types of specialized monsters. There are warriors, mages, attackers, defenders, and even assassins to deal with. This round is limited to 10 minutes, and their health points will not be reset to 0 during this period. After killing the Goblin King, points will be distributed based on the percentage of health remaining, a fair system, after hearing the rules. He pursed his lips. This round, as it turns out, is finally much closer to a real-world combat situation. It doesn't just test their raw power and endurance, but also their mobility and how well they can adapt on the fly. It's quite interesting, really. And then, following the system's command, an obese, wretched, and crowned goblin monster appeared before all the candidates who had chosen the purgatory difficulty. A moment later, a dozen monsters of various shapes and sizes materialized right beside the Goblin King. At the same time, candidates in the other dungeon instances almost immediately raised their hands and gave up. His health points have dropped to just a single point, and he is surrounded by dozens of monsters from the Goblin Light Squad. They torture him without mercy. At that moment, the bloodlock system integrated into the copy has become the most disgusting form of torture. But there is an exception. In the center of the large screen, the footage clearly shows a scene of absolute peace and harmony. Because, whether it's the Goblin King or his light squad bearing their teeth and claws, they have all been turned into realistic ice sculptures. They are laid out on the table. Li Yuanjing, who masters fire, wind, and ice, feels his own breathing become a bit uneasy. There have been far too many shocks and surprises throughout these 4 tests today, even for him. And this boy consistently uses the rank 4 ice skill, Blizzard, to dominate the field. After bringing all these monsters under control, he moved directly to end their suffering. With the rank 4 Flame Tempest continuously fading in and out, the pink fire and the extreme cold of the ice begin to blur together. Snowflakes fly and stars fade as dozens of elite goblins try in vain to guard their king. By the time the second Flame Tempest subsided, they had only a sliver of life left, and the third finished them off instantly. As for the Goblin King, once the 4th Flame Tempest had passed, his frozen state finally vanished. His health bar also dropped sharply due to the rank 6 passive ice effect triggered when the ice was shattered by fire sources. It directly reduced his maximum health points. So even though his health bar was much higher than that of his subordinates, under the heavy damage of 4 flame tempests and the percentage-based health reduction, he could only let out a miserable cry and die instantly. Barely 30 seconds have passed since the start of the 4th round, and he has cleared it with a truly astonishing display. He passed the 4th round, and a deathly silence reigns in the exam center meeting room after he killed the Goblin King in seconds. Li Yuanjing stood up to applaud, and then everyone else followed suit, caught up in a wave of genuine excitement. 4 rounds with a perfect score, a complete hexagonal warrior with no weaknesses. This year's provincial top spot is well-deserved. Li Yuanjing felt himself trembling slightly, because what has been created here isn't just 1 or 2 of the highest records in provincial history. He has also set a precedent that, until now, the province of Dongjiang had never seen before. A super genius like this is rare, and we can tell the boy's true strength goes far beyond what he's shown, even in a purgatory level 4th round. He hasn't even been forced to reveal his trump cards yet. Meanwhile, at the Tianhe First Examination Center, he finally steps out of the light portal. While others look like they've been through a war, he looks like he's just returning from a relaxing vacation as he leaves the hall. There, he sees a middle-aged man in an education department uniform waiting by the building, watching him with a knowing smile. "Congratulations, young man," he says. "You've secured the top spot in Dongjiang province this year, with a perfect score." The boy is a bit perplexed. To be honest, he hadn't even considered whether there might be a 5th round of testing. Li Yuanjing simply smiles and explains that while there is indeed a 5th round, it isn't held here. He'll have to travel to Didi. "You can rest until noon, and I'll personally take you to Didi later this afternoon to discuss the details of that final exam. It's likely a special dungeon extracted directly from the abyssal world, complete with its own unique difficulties and mechanics. Someone will explain it all once you arrive," Li adds. "I'm mainly here today because I wanted to meet you in person. And, of course, to give you your rewards." The boy is pleased. After all, who doesn't enjoy a well-earned prize? Li Yuanjing gestures for him to follow, but as he approaches, a black brush appears, and he is instantly swept away. A moment later, he realizes his surroundings have completely shifted, finding himself in a mysterious new underground space. "This is the education department's underground workshop. Give me your professional ID so I can process your payment." The provincial top prize is 1 million Axia pieces, a nice little bonus, plus 1,000 exchangeable skill points for his efforts. Those are the fixed rewards, but there's more. He can also choose 1 T2 level treasure from the official hoard. Furthermore, he is granted the honor of selecting a T2 level skill from the professional manual, a truly significant prize. Now, 1,000 skill points are worth over 1 million Axia pieces at current market rates, which is no small sum. But deep down, he knows those points are far more valuable to him than the cash, so he decides to speak up. "Director Li, regarding these 1,000 exchangeable skill points, would it be possible to trade them for other rewards instead?" Li Yuanjing gives him a surprised look, assuming the boy simply wants to grab more rare treasures from the hoard, and he rubs his head in thought. He explains that since this is a fixed reward, it isn't possible to swap it for other treasures, a realization that makes the boy scratch his head as well. However, he clarifies that he doesn't want more treasures. He wants to trade the points for cash, leaving Li Yuanjing looking quite puzzled. "You don't want skill points? You want money?" he asks, unable to hide his bewilderment at such a request. "I must remind you," he continues, "from a standpoint of pure efficiency, this is hardly a wise move. The cash value of those 1,000 points wouldn't be enough to buy them back later, a fact that, surprisingly, doesn't seem to deter the boy at all. He remains certain about the exchange, leading Li Yuanjing to realize that even though the boy is the provincial champion, he might be overlooking something. Or perhaps, as Li Yuanjing begins to suspect, there is a key detail about the boy's background that he hadn't fully considered until now. He imagines the boy comes from an impoverished family and is trying to provide for them, a thought that moves the director deeply. "If you trade them for Axia pieces, there will be a loss," he warns. "Usually, you'd lose about 20% of the value. But today, I'll cover that 20% from my own pocket. Your 1,000 skill points will be exchanged at full value. That amounts to roughly 5.35 million Axia pieces, which, along with his million-piece scholarship, will be sent to his account later today."